all the features I usually have.
Okay, I'll just get started. So we were going to start
Okay.
today with um, a biblical reflection, and then Moses is going to lead the next part with everyone. So since it's Advent, I want to reflect with you on something that has meant a lot to me in terms of church change, and that's the visitation. Although I'm not going to actually focus on the words of the Magnificat. So since we have lost a lot of time, I'll just read the parts that I'm going to focus more on from Luke. In those days, Mary set out and went with haste to a Judean town in the hill country, where she entered the house of Zechariah and greeted Elizabeth. When Elizabeth heard Mary's greeting, the child leaped in her womb, and Elizabeth was filled with the Holy Spirit and exclaimed with a loud cry, "Blessed are you among women, and blessed is the fruit of your womb. And why has this happened to me, that the mother of my Lord comes to me? For as soon as I heard the sound of your greeting, the child in my womb leaped for joy. And blessed is she who believed that there would be a fulfillment of what was spoken to her by the Lord. And Mary said, my soul magnifies the Lord, and my spirit rejoices in God my Savior." At the end of the section, it says, and Mary remained with her about 3 months and then returned to her home. So in Luke's gospel, immediately after Mary's encounter with the angel Gabriel, it says that she went with haste. And actually, our translation says Mary set out, but the Greek word is anastasa, which is the same word used on Easter. It's she got up, she arose. It's the same word as resurrection in Luke. So she rose up, and she went with haste. And it's also kind of ironic that it says she entered the house of Zechariah, but she's greeting Elizabeth. So the priest's house, where the priest is silent, calls forth in a way this women's liturgy. But at the end, there's a detail that I really never thought about until the past couple of years. And it's really, I've really thought about it a lot. And that's that the visit lasted 3 months. So why mention 3 months? My daughter-in-law right now is pregnant, and she didn't want it to be announced until 3 months had passed, because a large percentage of miscarriages, when they happen in the first trimester, obviously not all, but many women choose not to share the news of pregnancy until after those particularly vulnerable 3 months. Another thing about the 3 months that Luke, as a doctor, maybe have been more conscious of than everyone, is that the other men, obviously every body is different, but morning sickness is most common during the first 3 months. For many women, after a rush of hormonal changes, the body starts to adjust. By the end of the first trimester, morning sickness can fade away. Obviously, that is not everybody's experience, but it is common. And so I started to wonder, did she end up staying 3 months because it took that long before she felt well enough to make the return trip? In my experience, and I think many, of course, there's so much variety. Morning sickness, for me in the first trimester, was constant. And I prefer the Spanish word for it, which is mala barriga, or evil belly. So I like to think that the Magnificat comes out of these 3 months of mala barriga, which for Mary was a time of, upheaval in her body, but also there was a lot of stuff going on in the social body and political body that she's part of. And I've come to think that mala barriga can be a helpful way of understanding multicultural ministry, because just as Mary's body needed time to adjust to the way it was changing, so does the body of Christ. And the reality is that many people get queasy or feel nauseous, certainly uncomfortable, absorbing Mary's words of some being brought down from positions of privilege while others are lifted up. It's unsettling, it's uncomfortable, and even if we remove positions of privilege from it, if there's just any kind of major shift or change going on in a community, it can create those very uncomfortable, unsettled feelings. Some people can just feel like they want to be sick. So before going on to the next part, I thought I'd pause and invite a couple people if they'd like to share any signs of uncomfortableness that you've experienced in multicultural ministry in your context.
Sometimes there's so much, it's hard to sum up. How I'm feeling. It was such a broad question. Part of my heart goes, yeah.
That's okay.
Yes. You just get to think yes. Yeah.
Well, I'll keep going since we lost a lot of time. What I find really wonderful about this, thinking this way, is that most of the time when we feel sick, it indicates that something's wrong, and we want to do and should do whatever we can to get rid of whatever is causing us to feel sick. And I'm sure we know churches that have closed or about to close because basically they'd rather die than live with uncomfortable changes. But pregnancy is an example where this feeling in the body of Christ is not a sign of illness. It's a sign in the terms of morning sickness of new life. And the body needs time to adjust. And churches can learn this from women's bodies. And in my experience, it can be helpful to name that. So it's not like, oh, I'm bad because I'm feeling, I don't like this. It's making me extremely uncomfortable, but kind of like name the fact with people, yes, that, this is making us uncomfortable. And that doesn't mean you're bad or the thing is bad. It's it's a natural bodily process. Just as we can learn from, a woman's body, it can be like that in the body of Christ. And it means that we just have to get through this period, and it's not going to last forever. Now, this 3-month, it's really interesting in Luke, because in this particular passage, the 3 months that Mary's with Elizabeth, which I would imagine incorporated discomfort, was also a kind of shared liminal space, an embodied way for the dreams to grow so a different future can be born. In Luke, 3 months is always a kind of generative time. Particularly you see it in Acts, which supposedly Luke or whoever wrote Luke wrote Acts. And in Acts, Luke mentions that Luke stayed in Ephesus for 3 months and spent those 3 months speaking boldly to the people there. He stayed in Greece for 3 months in it was a kind of sanctuary space in the face of violent plots against him. He was there 3 months in this safe place, as Mary's in a safe place. Then he's on a ship at another point that's carrying him to Rome to stand trial, and the ship is wrecked in a storm. And Paul and his companions stayed on the island of Malta for 3 months, which was another kind of season of being in a safe place and preparing for next steps. So I think it's and those are the only times of mentioning this 3 months in the Gospels, and it's only in Luke. So I think it's worth thinking about and thinking of it as this kind of malabariga time, which on the one hand is discomfort, on the other hand is allowing time for the body to adjust to something new. Another part of this story that I always think about this time of year in Advent, I always, oh, I don't have my little one in front of me. This is a big one, magnifying glass. One year I was trying to think about talking about this story with children, and I ordered little mini magnifying glasses and handed them out. Because, you know, of course, obviously Mary magnifies the Lord, and magnifying glasses make things bigger. And, you know, it's easy for me, and I don't think I'm the only one, to magnify other stuff, magnify what goes wrong. Like, well, when I used to be in church in person with people, you know, like you could get like, I don't know, a whole bunch of positive comments and have a wonderful morning. And one person, you know, says one thing. And what's the thing I magnify in my brain? It's that one thing, you know? Mary kind of is doing the opposite. And, you know, she could have been magnifying all the stuff that's not coming out right and the, you know, that we're feeling bad about and discouraged about, but no, Mary magnifies the Lord. And she's also magnifying embryonic hope in a way. I mean, you know, she's talking in the Magnificat about things as if they've already happened, but they're really too small to see. I mean, you probably need a microscope, not a magnifying glass. And I like to think, the phrase that I use is magnifying the flutters. Like when you're first pregnant, or if you first feel, you know, I mean, Elizabeth feels the kicking feet of John the Baptist. Mary can't feel that yet. It's too early. But the first thing you feel are not kicking, but what's sometimes called like a butterfly or a bird's wing. It's a flutter. And so Mary is really magnifying the flutter. She's singing of this future that's embryonic. You can't really see it, and yet it's there. And so I handed out magnifying glasses for people to kind of magnify the flutters, like see the magnifying glass, and you'll have to take an imaginary one. You know, what's going on? It's so easy to magnify the bad stuff, but try and have that little imaginary magnifying glass. And, you know, what are the flutters this week? And don't dismiss them. Oh, it's nothing, you know, it's so little, it doesn't really matter. It does matter. And it can really make all the difference in the world. And it's an exercise you could do with people too, is ask people, is actually get the little magnifying glasses, and ask people, you know, what are the flutters? What are the little tiny signs that they see? And appreciate them together. By sharing it with others is a kind of a way of magnifying it. And last but not least, I'll just share a quote I love during Advent from the Brazilian theologian Ruben Alves. Hope is that presentiment that the imagination is more real and reality less real than we had thought. It is a sensation that the last word does not belong to the brutality of facts with their oppression and repression. It is a suspicion that reality is far more complex than realism would have us believe, that the frontiers of the possible are not determined by the limits of the present, and that miraculously and surprisingly, life is readying the creative event that will open the way to freedom and resurrection. So I think because we've lost so much time, I won't invite you to share the flutters, but think about them. Moses, can we hear you?
Yes,
Oh, good.
yes. Sorry. sorry for taking up some time, your time as well, Heidi, and everyone's time.
No, no, it's fine.
But I appreciate your words. Those are such beautiful and lovely things to think about during this season, to make us think about just I guess the broader, even broader understanding of this Advent season and this season of anticipation and waiting. I just quickly want to share a few thoughts, a few words. I studied under this professor. His name is Dr. Soong-Chang Rah, and he's a Korean American who planted a church, a multi-ethnic church in Boston, in the Boston area, and then later on became a professor. He's now in Chicago at North Park Theological Seminary, but he shares, he has this book called Many Colors. And Many Colors by Soong-Chang Rah, he really brings awareness about cultural intelligence. And he believes that it's one of the most, probably the most important, or one of the most important bases for continuing to build the church. He speaks about how the development of multicultural churches in North America has created this new, and this is nothing new to us, but certainly it's this conglomerate of cultures and ethnicities that have gathered together in our country. And so then the level of diversity raises the stakes, right? It raises the level of competency that's necessary for cultural intelligence. And so if we think of cultural intelligence, he points out that there are different ways to grow this area of cultural intelligence and to really attempt to build an authentically multicultural congregation. And Rah, he focuses on 4 areas. We won't be able to focus on all 4 today, but he talks about storytelling. He talks about experiential learning. He talks about hospitality, and then he speaks about systems thinking. We won't be able to cover all 4. I've chosen this to center kind of some of my thoughts here around hospitality today, because I think hospitality it's pretty concrete, and we can learn from that pretty quickly. Hospitality in a multicultural church. And firstly, he advocates for hospitality to happen through meals or through sharing of meals. And food is a critical part of culture. And so I don't know how many of us have this where you have meals after church, but you know, I found that when people speak different languages and they don't quite know how to communicate with words, that one of the most effective ways to communicate culture is through the expression of food. And so we learn from one another's culture and foods, because oftentimes we have to explain our foods, right? In these multicultural settings, or if you ever had a potluck, someone stands in front of their dish and explains and kind of gives you maybe a level of spice for some of these. How spicy is this? What are some ingredients? But those moments of eating and having meals with one another is probably one of the more spiritual moments that I've experienced. And so I'm wondering if anybody has meals after church or who has experienced anything like this. And again, because of time, we probably can't share too much, but that has been a very important thing, hospitality through meals. And I know you all know this, but it's never okay to say, you know, something like, what is that? Or what is that smell? Or that looks nasty. Or, you know, I mean, I've heard, you know, children sometimes say stuff like this, but, you know, it's never okay to say that. Instead, we try to elevate the food and say how beautiful it is, or how beautiful it looks or smells, or so on. But it's a way to learn from one another and bring about hospitality. There's so much more to say about that, and I'll leave it at that. But there is something about when you taste someone else's food from another culture. It's, again, I guess it's a way to say, I want to learn more about you. I want to know more about you. You matter to me, right? Another hospitality point of view or perspective comes from that the Eucharist, right? The Eucharist is very theological here, because I think it's within the United Methodist Church that they use the love feast, or maybe they use it in other denominations, but the Eucharist being the love feast. And so it's really this feast that we're having, where love of God is being shared from one to the other. And so I would say a multicultural church eats together. Another thing is learning or hospitality through learning the language. So adapting to a new culture is to learn the language. And I think of missionaries, and missionaries who spend up to 2 or 3 years learning a language before they even enter the field of ministry in a new country. Language acquisition is often seen as a key element of cultural intelligence. Given the range of the cultures and ethnicities that are in our country, that are in our cities, it's probably irresponsible for the American church to not even attempt to learn another language. I think of like my community. I had to learn how to greet someone in Thai, or how to, and I know Spanish and English, but then I didn't know Thai, so I started learning how can I say thank you, and how can I say hello, and sawadee krap, and put my hands together and, bow my head. And so living in one of the most diverse nations in the world, I think demands us to learn the basics of other languages that are around us, how to say hello, how to say thank you, maybe a few phrases. And in doing this, we show our willingness to learn about another culture through language. And again, a multicultural church shows hospitality through learning the language. Another thing, hospitality through diverse worship expressions. As Lutherans, we believe God calls us to worship, right? And we see God as the initiator who comes down to us, and then we respond in prayer and praise. If we truly believe that God has made all people in God's image, right, then do we not believe that worship should be an expression of all of God's people? Now, I know this is difficult at times when we start thinking about our Lutheran liturgy, because it doesn't always necessarily open itself up to other expressions or other versions. But I think this is where worship should become an act of hospitality. And so I guess the question I ask is, what kind of hospitality does your church extend to those or towards those who are coming from different backgrounds or different cultural contexts, so that they feel welcomed and part of the liturgy? Whose stories are central to our church's expression of worship? Whose cultures are central to our church's expression of worship? Sometimes it's been my experience, at least when I have talked to different people, that one cultural expression of worship tends to dominate, and then it sends off sometimes the wrong message, as though Sunday service is not welcoming, as though Sunday worship is sending the vibes that it's almost hostile, because it undermines cultural diversity. It almost ignores it. And so I often take time to share a thought or a brief moment of teaching to increase awareness and understanding of, well, why do we do the Great Thanksgiving, and why are we passing the peace, and these kind of things. So sometimes I feel like one culture makes it feel like it's normal, and yet the other group begins to feel like their culture is on the outside and it's not the norm, and therefore feels not welcomed to the context of the church's worship. So I would just say that it's imperative that different cultural expressions manifest themselves in the setting of public worship and in the public life of the church. I mean, this is like the face, right, of what people see. And I know we've talked briefly about this, how a word, a caution, right, that if a culture is not represented in your community and you do not know a lot about that culture either, that to not perform superficial representation, right, of of that culture just for the sake of diversity. I think it's very important that Sunday worship is a place where we get to show the world this is who we are, this is what we're about, and we cannot be sending the vibes of exclusion, is what I'm saying. And this is why we ask sometimes, well, why do people not stay if they come to visit, or what happens? Why do they not feel welcome? Why do they not return for a second or third or fourth time? I think these are questions to ask. And then one more thing I'll say here is that I do think this is why it's vital to provide a kind of a visible upfront presence of a wide variety of cultures and races that are represented in our church. And so I often would say to a lot of our folks, our smallest percentage of one of the smaller cultural groups represented in our congregation is the Black community, the African American community. And so I often have to speak to our African American brothers and sisters and say, I need you on stage. I need you to come and read a prayer because you embody what our congregation wants to be about. And if I had a family come to visit that week, that was African American or Black, I hope they would see you on stage leading and guiding and speaking. And so then there is this representation of everyone in our community on stage. And so another way to bring about hospitality is through our expression of worship. And I know this is not easy, but it's something we have to wrestle with, right? If we want to be offering hospitality in a multicultural church, a homogenous church would never have to deal with a lot of this, right? We wouldn't have to be explaining our foods in a homogenous group. We wouldn't have to be thinking of anybody else because it's common. We all see it the same. We all experience it the same. We all, when I get together with people of my ethnicity, of my culture, we don't have to explain what these foods are, or why they, how spicy they are, or these kinds of things, because we all know it. And that's what seems to happen in most churches. We all create a culture, a church culture, and then we forget about those who are coming to visit, those who are coming to check us out, those who are coming to find belonging. And I will say the last thing around this. At some point, the church needs to move on from hospitality and become family. And I think my professor gives a good example of his kimchi. He says that it's one thing to just have kimchi one time. It's a whole other deal to have the kimchi every single Sunday. It's a whole other deal to put his kimchi next to your milk, and now your milk tastes like kimchi. Has that aftertaste. So there is something about cultural intelligence that is about an ongoing, long-term journey. It's not a quick fix. It's not an immediate successful results. It's a long-term commitment to self-sacrifice, honestly, because hospitality can only go so far. But as you know, hospitality still implies that I'm a guest. But at some point, I'm no longer a guest. At some point, I become part of the family. My culture, my exotic foods, my language, it's part of the family. And as you know, there is a difference between hosting a friend for a weekend or a few days versus a guest living with you permanently. There's a difference between having someone stay overnight and then someone moving in with you. And so at some point, the true challenge, I think, is making a home together. How many congregations that we have that are of two different ethnicity groups, races or cultural groups that are sharing the same facility? And at some point, they can't just continue to be hospitable to each other, but they have to move into this actual familial relationship. And a multicultural church must move from acts of hospitality to family. And a family as you know, does not merely tolerate differences, right? But a family embraces them. I think this is I guess, what I'm trying to say, a multicultural church needs to move beyond acts of hospitality and become a family. I'll leave it there. There is so much you can share. I don't know if anybody has any thoughts, any comments. Are some of you practicing meals or practicing liturgy in a way that is welcoming and inviting, or I don't know, learning the language? I mean, these are just a few things that come around a multicultural church that I think is so vital and important. I can't tell you how many meals we've had that have just brought about awareness of one another and has brought about relationship and friendship from one another. I don't know, Heidi. I mean, it's potlucks. Has that always been kind of like a Lutheran thing? And maybe it is, but I mean, the kind of potlucks that I'm talking about have like all kinds of different foods, and it's just a great experience.
Well, that's definitely true here. And that's one of the, that's one of the sad things right now, right? We can't eat together. We can't break bread together.
Yes.
December 12th is the Feast of the Virgin of Guadalupe. And
Right.
we always have a big, on that particular day, particularly Mexican food, but this huge meal, and people are so proud to share the special dishes of that day, and the atole and the pan dulce and all this stuff. And this year, we're gonna have a service online, no food, no shared singing. I mean, the whole thing with because we can't worship outside here in New York. I mean, one of the things with the Virgin of Guadalupe is Las Mañanitas, the morning songs, and people come at 6 in the morning. They come at 6 in the morning to sing these songs together, followed by a special traditional breakfast. We can't do any of that this year.
Wow.
I think I don't even know how to build multicultural community when you can't eat together or sing together.
Have you ever tried, I mean, I don't know what you guys, I haven't checked your Facebook feeds or whatever, but I know that we've had people volunteer at some of the other churches locally, not my congregation, but some of them have had like members who make certain meals for certain festivals and stuff. And so they're creating short videos from the kitchen of the church and doing videos of how to make this, and this is what this is, and this is my family tradition, and telling their own family stories. So people are connecting to parishioners and hearing that parishioner's story and their own through their food and doing it that way. And so, I know that's, I put sand tarts in the discussion thing. That's kind of been a joke recently because my daughter's boyfriend is Jewish, more or less, and from New Jersey, and he had never had a sand tart nor heard of one. But we're Pennsylvania.
I've never had a sand tart or heard of one.
Oh no! Well, it's a Pennsylvania Dutch thing. It's a tradition. It's a German thing. I'm
German, but I've never heard of it.
Yeah, it's a Pennsylvania Dutch thing. They're really just sugar cookies, but they're rolled so thin and decorated with colored sugars and stuff, so that when you hold them up to the window, they look like stained glass.
Oh wow!
They're just sugar and cinnamon, which is delicious no matter what culture you're in. But so that's been our big educational moment today as a sand tart. If I had a few, I'd show them to you, but we don't have any in the house. I gave them all to my parents. So.
Fun. Yeah. Our congregation has had some cooking videos, but it's been with a child and an adult. It's more geared to the children having something to watch together and then be able to duplicate that in their homes. They give the demonstration, they give some recipes. But last year, one of the things that I think we had the best attendance for was something we had 2 women who had started to be involved with things in the congregation who came and did a tamale making demonstration and party. And we had 70 people show up to learn how to make the tamales. And we were so hoping to repeat that this year, even if we could just do it on YouTube. And then they could show the tamale making and do it in our own homes. I believe that has fallen through and is not going to happen. But that food, and they came sometimes to our Advent meals and ate some of the foods that we were more accustomed to, although we weren't not focusing on particular ethnic foods of our own. But that was something we had talked about a year ago, perhaps for this coming January, to try to do a time when various people would bring their own ethnic foods. But I don't think that's going to be able to happen now, not in person. Mm-hmm.
Doing that kind of video, especially around food, seems like a valuable way during the pandemic, especially of like lifting up individual voices. I'm thinking especially congregations where like individual families' technology might not be up to like the congregation I'm part of right now is mostly older congregation. Everyone's just watches the worship, and so interaction between congregants is much more limited than it would usually be. And so for individual people to be able to use the church's technology, but to lift up like members of the laity, and their voices and their sort of stories. It's like a way to sort of create some of those connections, even in the midst of something like this.
And the other thing too, that early in our mission development program, we were having discussions about offering English as a second language in our community, but really there's so many different groups that are doing that we started offering Spanish classes to the people in the congregation. And that has been really well attended, and it's continued through pandemic. They're doing it by Zoom now and got a professional teacher in to do it too, so.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, if there is, I mean, yeah, because Zoom, I mean, you can still teach. That's you know, that doesn't stop. But I think that's a wonderful. I do a Spanish language Bible study for my Senate with about 4 other pastors, and one of the things we talk about often is how we can, in some ways, embody our neighborhoods. Our congregations can embody our neighborhoods, which tend to be within Spanish-speaking communities, and a couple of the churches that are mostly homogenized, you know, European descent, they are doing exactly that. They are doing, you know, basic Spanish classes to learn, you know, phrases and at least some basic phrasing to be able to connect with their local community. And I think it speaks a lot. I mean, you know, when you start hearing people speak a language that they don't, but it demonstrates a compassion and openness to the other. I think that's what we want to be known as, right? We want to be known as people who are loving our community. So these are different ways of hospitality. Yeah, go ahead.
I wanted to touch on the visible welcome piece for a second, because I think I love a little brainstorming maybe. One of the things that happened early on when I got to the congregation where I am was it's kind of like a blank slate. They have this huge gymnasium. It's in the city. It's a huge gymnasium, and it's all this old yellowed plaster that, you know, needs an uplift. And so there's a local guy who does graffiti art who I invited over and kind of said, here's a slate. What would you do with it? And he gave us a proposal. It looked great. But one of the things that he said to me really hit me. And it's an issue of curb appeal. So when you talk about visible welcome, one of the things he said as we were standing in the parking lot looking at this big yellow and brick building was, wow, it looks just like the prison. And you know, and when he said that, I thought, to be in a community where their experience of the prison and the legal system and stuff, and to have someone standing in your parking lot and say your church looks like that, it really hit me. And I was like, and you know, which made him painting the building even more urgent in my book, but that's another story. But I guess a lot of our buildings, I know this, having been to some of your area, I've been pretty much everywhere where everybody's from. So I know that it isn't always true, but here in central Pennsylvania, most of our buildings are around the same period and they all are brick. And they look like the prisons, because that's about the time that they were built. They were all built out of the same materials and stuff. Yeah. And yeah. I'm beginning to see it more and more through those eyes. And what I'm thinking about is, what do you do with that? I mean, what do you do with the visible welcome of that? Because that's a huge, for me, that's a big deal. Like we talk about white people having a hard time walking into our churches because it's hard to walk into a church. But if I'm looking at a building and it reminds me of the prison, I don't think I'd want to go in it either. So yeah. I guess I'm kind of wondering, if you have any ideas about that, because that's just something that hit me, was that we have a real church design issue here.
Yeah. I don't know, Heidi, what do you think? Yeah.
Well, the idea of a mural is great. I mean, that was really transformative for my church in the Bronx, where the church had been locked on Sunday, locked for like 3 years. They didn't have a pastor. They had a supply person. When he arrived on Sunday morning and the little group was there, they locked the doors. They literally locked the doors before worship started because they were afraid. Wow. And these were the same ethnicity. They were all, at that time, it was a Puerto Rican neighborhood. All the members of the church were Puerto Rican, but there was a slight class difference, and they were afraid of the neighborhood. And the doors were covered with graffiti. And before I came, they painted them, but then, every day they were covered with fresh graffiti. And I did what you did. I invited some neighborhood kids to, every week they came, and they weren't professional graffiti artists yet, but they came and they painted the gospel, their version of the gospel, on the front doors of the church, and it changed every week. And, people then were like really, they were interested in watching the kids painting on the doors, because it was like kids' artwork, not in some corner, but like right on the front doors. And the front doors were right on the sidewalk, so it worked in that setting. But even when the doors were closed, it was kind of proclaiming a different kind of message. Like, the youth of this neighborhood are like putting their vision right on the front doors of the church. So it changed the whole sense of, this place is locked up, even when the doors were closed. So I think I think the idea of a mural is great, because people's eyes will be drawn immediately, I would say, to the colors of the mural. And it won't look like I think that's a fantastic idea. It takes away from the prison.
I do too. I moved here to Arizona 8 years ago from Western Pennsylvania, all the same kind of architecture, and everything was steps up here, steps up to the altar, and they look like fortresses, and there's no parking, and so that's a whole other issue. But I think to do something bold like the graffiti will at least send a non-visual message out there that what goes on in this building is not what you think necessarily, because there's something fresh and different out there.
Yeah.
I know some churches also, they'll create a banner or banners. And I know sometimes cities are a little bit, depends on what city you're in about that, but I've seen banners that have been created to kind of, paint the walls, shall we say, and give it at least a message. That is an inviting message. If you're LGBT friendly, whatever it is, you could put up something and that invites and says, kind of like what Barbara was saying. It's like there's something going on in here that perhaps our building isn't communicating.
Yeah, we have pride flags outside, and we have members of the church that have. I mean, they say they would not have walked into the doors of the church if they hadn't seen that flag, because, and certainly, I mean, we're reconciling in Christ, but that doesn't mean anything to except an insider group of Lutherans.
Right.
The flag does, and it's very scary to walk. I mean, to walk in and not know how you're going to be greeted, and the flag. Right. I mean, people can fly a flag and still be homophobic, but
True.
Hopefully, but the flag is like a sign, and then you better live up to that. But that just seeing that on the outside can make all the difference in the world. And it has. I mean, we have people that would have never walked, that have told me, I would have never walked in the church. And one person told me, the day I walked by and saw that flag, it was like God saying to me, you no longer have any excuses not to go to church. But yeah, a sign of signs and signals on the outside of the building can make a big difference.
One of the things we tried last year, not this year, but was because we have kind of like a more of a smaller sanctuary, and our property, it's not that it's run down, but there's certain areas that just look a little bit dated. And so one of the things we did is we took church outside. And I know not everybody can do that, but we did do that. And so we just had our gathering outside for like a whole month. And that was one way to let people, because we have kind of a busy street where we're at, so traffic's passing by, and hopefully people can see who we are and what we do. And I don't know, it just gave a different vibe. And we had a lot of people walking their dogs, and they would stop and they would hear, or they would just, be curious about what we're doing. So I don't know, I'm just thinking of other ways that we can send out a message of what's happening inside. May not reflect what's happening outside. Any thoughts also around the idea of moving from hospitality to family? Did you grab that concept? Have you seen that concept happen? The only story not the only story, but there's a story in our congregation where we learned really quickly kind of like some of our differences culturally when it came to having, I don't know, any kind of event, or if it was a potluck or anything we were going to do in the church. And one group we used, what is that? What are those, how you put, I cannot remember the name of this. I can't. Anyways, you sign up, you have sign up sheets, right? And the sign up sheets are put on this thing that I can't think of right now. And clipboard. So people would sign up on this clipboard, right? And half of the congregation, our older congregation, they would all sign up and say, I'm bringing, salad, or I'm bringing whatever it is. And then the other half of the congregation, the younger congregants would not fill out that clipboard at all. And they would literally come up and like tell me, like, Pastor, I'm going to bring this, or I want to bring that. What do you think about this? And then we started having differences, right? Because one group said, well, this is how we've always done it. Sign up on the clipboard, and then we know who's bringing what. And then the other group is like, no, that's not how we do things. Like, that's not the way we do things, at least. And so you can see that we all create a church culture of some kind. And we all begin to, in some ways, lift up something that may look as normative or as something that is just the dominant culture. But when there's another group of people who don't do it that way, it's when you begin to see, oh, maybe my way isn't the only way. Maybe my way isn't the right way. You know what I mean? And so that's one of the things we noticed really quick in our congregation, in our setting, and we had to find kind of a middle ground. And so now we do the clipboard for those who want to do the clipboard and feel like I've signed up. But then we also have this secondary time after church where we ask people to come and to a table and to share if they want to participate. And that gives the people who are more, I don't know, they don't just want to write something down, but they want to think about it or they want to talk about it, give them the opportunity to share in that way. So something as simple as the clipboard can become a big issue, or it could teach us that we do things differently and that there is no wrong way or right way, but that there's different ways, and that's okay. So I don't know if you've experienced anything like that, but at some point that was the move from being hospitable, to trying to say, hey, can you use the clipboard? And then to kind of be more like, no, this is how this group of people is, and that's okay. It's not just tolerating it, but now I embrace it. Oh, okay, I see why you do it the way you do it. From hospitality to family.
Yeah, that's definitely true here. It also, in terms of signing up for anything, like it's definitely generational. And some things, I mean, like people ahead of time, like a week ahead of time or 2 weeks ahead of time, they're not sure, what they're going to be doing.
Right.
So they don't want to commit themselves. I mean, in a way, it's because they don't want to be irresponsible. Like some people think, oh, it's irresponsible. Why don't you sign up? Well, it's just the opposite. The other person's thinking, I don't want to say I'm going to sign up to read, or I'm going to sign up to lead this, or I'm going to sign up to bring that, because maybe in 2 weeks I can't do that. And so those are people I found you've got to, email at the last minute, or they'll just, if it's food, like if it's not food, let's say it's being a reader, no one signed up to read, then email the people that love to read, but they can't commit ahead of time. Email them on Friday and say, who's available to read. And then you'll get like 5 people, but they will not sign up ahead of time because they don't want to let you down.
That's right.
And, with food, it might depend on how much money a person has at the end of the week. It might depend on so many different things. So people will, there are different ways of doing it.
Yeah.
And I will say that the people that used to all, do it a certain way, they've now accepted that. They'll say, well, Pastor, we've only have this amount of people that have signed up, but we know that a lot of other people will bring food. Like now that's the calculation.
Yes, that's right. I know it's and I had to have conversations with some of our members who were diehard clipboard sign up people, and it was like just to let them know they're coming. Okay, they're coming. Is this going to be like you said? There's so many dynamics going on that that this is why people would say I don't want to sign up, because what if I can't come that Sunday and I've already signed up to bring something? It's so true. There's so much.
Well, and then you get new people who perceive that something as little as a clipboard is a big deal to these people. And how does that come across? I don't know.
You mean how does it?
That would make me uncomfortable to show up to worship the first time and realize there was a clipboard controversy going on. And you would think, is this what I want to be part of? But it happens all the time, I know.
No, you're right.
So,
yeah. I know. It's so it's just a reminder that even within every congregation, there is a culture. And we may not necessarily think about it too much because we're part of the culture. We do it. This is how we've always done it. But in a multicultural setting, if we really want to have a multicultural congregation, it requires a lot more attentiveness to small things like that. Because we all, like Heidi was saying, we all see it differently and we all respond to it differently. And we have to be aware of all that, which maybe in other settings we wouldn't have to be so much. And so I just think in some ways hospitality takes on a whole other meaning, if that makes sense. Maybe even a greater meaning within a multicultural setting than it would within a homogeneous setting.
I went, I don't know if it's St. Olaf. I think it's St. Olaf has a special Kierkegaard collection. And with all the volumes of Kierkegaard in all different languages and scholars come from all over the world. And the person in charge of welcoming the visiting scholars told me something really interesting when I visited there. He had, a scholar would come from Brazil. And this is kind of stereotypical, but he said it was his experience. And to welcome, to provide hospitality to the scholars from Brazil, like, they wanted to connect with a lot of other people too. They wanted, after they were done like doing their scholarly stuff, they wanted to go to a party. They wanted to socialize with people. And it was his job to help connect them with other events and things around campus and the town that they could connect with. He said, somebody would come from Finland and it was like, leave them alone. And I said, wow, church ushers should learn from this, because he had to learn that what's welcoming to one person is the opposite for another person. And that you had to really learn about who you are hosting. And I mean, this was his job for a number of years. So he had learned this, and then adjust your form of hospitality to the person. And I thought, that's a good lesson for the church too. It's not one size fits all.
You're so right. So even a welcome, right?
Yeah. Well, and the whole issue, some people like to be hugged. Some people don't want to be touched. True. I mean, and being sensitive to that and not imposing, what I can't stand is and I'm happy to, hug, but these people that will come up and go, well, I'm a hugger. And then it's like, well, it doesn't matter, like, if you want to hug this person or not, they're a hugger. So, they don't even care what you want.
What you are, yeah.
It's there's a lot of things it's not easy, and we're going to make mistakes. No. I think the important thing is to just try to be aware of that and grow and ask people, be curious about it,
Yeah, I like that. I think you're right, because that's just like you just brought up a few things, right? Welcome, the hug or not hug. I think of it in time. For example, time is interesting. Some people, some cultural groups, they show up 15, 20 minutes before the start of something, and that's just their practice. And others are much more casual with that. They'll show up 10 to 15 minutes after it starts.
Right.
Again, and then we have that conflict as well, because you have people within the same congregational setting that may be on time or 5 minutes before or 10 minutes before, and then others who show up 10, 15, 20 minutes after church starts. And then we start kind of thinking, well, maybe those people don't care about the church, or they don't really care about coming to worship. And it's not necessarily that, but we start, in other words, bringing our perspective, our biases, our beliefs, our way of looking at things. And we don't really know, well, why is it that this other group looks at time differently than me?
Yeah.
So it's just small things like that. I think you're right, though. I think all of that is different things of cultural intelligence that we don't need to know everything, right? Because that's impossible. We're not going to know everything about every group. It's just impossible. But we know the cultural groups that are in our communities, the ones that we run into, or the ones that we see that are different than us, and how to be more hospitable and grow in our cultural intelligence of those cultures, I think would be one great way to bring about, just a healthy multicultural setting.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if there's anything else. Anybody else would like to share?
Well,
Well, we are. Go ahead. Did someone say? So Heidi, I think there is a January large gathering, I want to say, still with Congregational Vitality, I want to say, or am I wrong? Or is
I
it
think so.
in December?
No,
There's something.
there is one, there's none in December, there's one in January.
That's what I thought. Okay. And that's the one that we got to figure out what date that is. Because we don't want to meet
Oh.
on that same week.
I have it on my calendar as January 14th,
That's
Okay.
what I
Thursday,
have.
14th.
14.
And I have this meeting on my calendar for the 13th.
Mm.
No,
We may have said that.
Okay, that's
Should we move it a week after? Would be like the 21st or something? Or, I'm sorry, the 20th, which would be Wednesday?
20th.
Does the next round of Congregational Vitality start in like February? I know they were talking about doing like another training,
I think so, yeah.
as long as it doesn't start immediately.
So the 20th, I guess, would be the last one, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Our last one.
Our last one, right.
Okay.
So everybody's good with 20th? We do 20th Wednesday, same time?
if it's at this time, I can do it. If it's the same time of day.
Yeah. Yeah, that's fine.
Okay.
Should be the same time.
Okay.
Should be able to.
You find out when you're retired, you have so many meetings and so many things you have to do. The calendar really fills up fast.
Oh, no,
Oh,
no.
yeah.
I'm gonna do that when I retire.
Okay, so we got the 14th
it.
will be our large gathering, and then the 20th will be our last cohort gathering, and then we'll figure out what happens in February if they restart this.
That would be a
good.
new session though, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that would be a new
This
session.
is
Yeah,
all that, okay.
that would end. Yeah. So if this was your year, then you've completed your year.
My year? No,
Yeah.
I went a year ago in Baltimore, but I didn't go in February. I went back.
That one, the
Oh.
February one was in San Diego.
Right, and I was not there, just
Okay.
Baltimore. So have I done a year? I don't know.
I know. I guess it's so crazy with COVID. You can't even keep up with it. But hopefully we're turning the corner. Hopefully we're turning. Okay. Anybody would like to pray us out for today? Sorry again for I still don't know what's wrong with my Zoom. It's all weird. It looks really weird on my side. I don't know if I need to update. I have no idea.
You sound better now. Yeah,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
seem to. Yeah.
It's just, my whole thing looks weird.
Reboot.
I'll find out. I have another meeting at 1 o'clock, so I gotta figure this out right now after this. Prayers? Okay. Then I will pray us out. The Lord be with you.
Also with
And
you.
also with you.
Dear God, we give you thanks for this day. Thank you for this time to continue to think and ponder and explore and allow your spirit to speak to us as we try to do the best work that we can for your church. Remind us that you are the God of Israel, the God who brought your people out of Egypt, and you responded to the cries of injustice. And in that same way, you are responding to us and help us, the ones that you have gathered, that you've brought together to be your church, so that we can respond to the cries of injustice in our neighborhoods, in our cities, in our churches, in the world. I pray today for all those who are just continuing to struggle with suffer from COVID-19. I think of my state here, God. We are in shutdown. We are in stay-home orders, and just yesterday, I can't even remember. I think it's over 60,000 cases. I just can't believe what's happening now. But I pray for every single person that you would bring about healing, that you would bring about comfort, that you would bring about rest for those, and solace for those who are afraid, for those who are unsure. May you use this vaccine that is soon to come so that we can begin to turn that corner, Lord. And hopefully, in the same way, the church can begin to turn that corner as we come back, hopefully here in person soon. I pray that you would bless us and guide us on this day and wherever we go in the ministry ahead of us, whatever we need to accomplish this day or this week, may it be all for your glory and your praise. We give you thanks for all, and we go off now with your love in our hearts and with your grace with us everywhere we go. We give you thanks in your name, we pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you very much.
You're so welcome.
He has a good Christmas.
Sorry again.
Oh, thank you.
Yes.
Michael, I hope
Yeah,
you
Merry
get a nice
Christmas.
rest.
Yeah. Very good. All right. We'll see you after the
All
first
right.
of the year then. Okay.
Take
Goodbye.
care.
Bye.